I realized my family had erased me from their lives the moment I watched my own father smile for a photograph that should have included me. The picture popped up on social media while I was standing alone in a hotel ballroom, still wearing my wedding dress. My mother was there. My father was there. My younger brother and every one of my cousins were there. The only person missing was the bride, me. For almost 30 seconds, I simply stared at the screen, convinced someone had edited the image, or that my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me. But then another photo appeared. And another. Different angles, different guests, different captions. Best family celebration ever. I looked around the room. Half the tables were empty. The DJ had stopped playing because nobody was dancing. The wedding planner kept pretending to rearrange flowers just to avoid making eye contact with me. Across the room, my fiancé Ethan walked toward me carrying 2 glasses of champagne. He followed my eyes to the phone screen and sighed quietly. They actually did it. I couldn't even answer. Months of planning, years of dreaming, decades of hoping that maybe this time my family would finally choose me. And somehow, they still found a reason not to. If someone had told me that morning I'd end the night questioning whether I ever really had a family at all, I would have laughed. By midnight, I wasn't laughing anymore. The strange part wasn't that they skipped my wedding. The strange part was that I almost expected it. Growing up, I learned early that our household revolved around one person. My younger brother, Kyle. Kyle wasn't a bad person, at least not when we were children. He was simply the favorite. If he forgot homework, Mom blamed the teacher. If he broke something expensive, Dad called it an accident. If I earned straight A's, the response was usually, "That's nice. Could you help Kyle study?" When I bought my first used car after working 2 summer jobs, everyone congratulated Kyle because he had finally passed his driving test. When I graduated college with honors, my parents left the ceremony early because Kyle wanted to celebrate getting accepted into a local community program. Little moments, tiny disappointments, the kind people tell you to let go because family is family. So I did, again, and again, and again, until disappointment became normal. When Ethan proposed on a windy evening overlooking Lake Michigan, he asked only one thing: "Promise me this wedding is for us." I smiled and promised. Looking back, I wish I had kept that promise. Because somehow, my family managed to make the entire event about themselves before invitations were even printed. My mother wanted to change the venue because it wasn't convenient. My father thought the guest list should prioritize business contacts. Kyle complained that the date interfered with a weekend golf tournament. Every conversation ended with me apologizing for decisions about my own wedding. Ethan noticed long before I did. One night he closed his laptop and simply asked, "Have they ever put you first?" I answered immediately. "Of course." Then I spent the next 10 minutes trying to remember when. Nothing came to mind. Still, I convinced myself this wedding would be different. People change. Families grow. Parents realize mistakes. Or at least that's what every hopeful daughter tells herself. 3 weeks before the ceremony, Kyle announced he had booked a surprise celebration for the same weekend. Not the same day exactly. Just close enough that relatives started calling. Would it be okay if they attended his event first? Could they arrive late? Maybe only stop by your reception? One aunt suggested I postpone my own wedding because Kyle's opportunity might never happen again. Nobody explained why my opportunity mattered less. I swallowed my frustration, I always did. Then, 48 hours before the ceremony, cancellations flooded in. An uncle had unexpected travel issues. A cousin suddenly became sick. Another relative claimed airline prices were too high, despite having booked vacations twice as expensive that same month. The excuses kept coming until nearly half the guest list disappeared. Ethan's mother hugged me after hearing another phone call end badly. "You don't have to keep pretending this doesn't hurt." For the first time all week, I almost cried, but I didn't. I was too busy making centerpieces, confirming catering numbers, and telling vendors everything was perfectly fine. Because if you've spent your whole life being the reliable one, eventually you learn that nobody expects you to break. Then the wedding day arrived. Sunlight poured through the ballroom windows. Fresh flowers lined the aisle. The string quartet practiced quietly while guests filtered inside. I kept glancing toward the entrance. Every time the doors opened, my heart jumped. Every time it was someone else. An old coworker, a neighbor, one of Ethan's college friends. Never my parents, never Kyle. Never anyone from the family I'd spent 34 years trying to earn love from. The ceremony itself was beautiful anyway. Ethan looked at me as though nothing else in the room existed. For 20 perfect minutes, I almost forgot the empty seats. Then the reception began. People pulled out phones. Someone whispered. Another guest frowned at their screen. Finally, my maid of honor walked over and silently handed me hers. That's when I saw the photographs. My entire family gathered together hundreds of miles away, dressed in formal clothes, laughing under sparkling lights, not because of an emergency, not because someone had died, not because disaster struck. They had simply decided another celebration mattered more than mine. I felt something inside me go completely still, not anger, not heartbreak, something colder, acceptance. Because in that exact moment, without realizing it, they had handed me the freedom I had been too afraid to claim for years. And none of us knew that before sunrise, a single phone call would expose a secret so devastating that every person who abandoned my wedding would come begging to stand at my door again. When the last guest left the ballroom, I finally took off my heels. My feet hurt. My makeup was starting to crack. And the silence in that enormous room somehow felt louder than the music that had been playing only minutes earlier. Ethan found me sitting alone beside the dance floor, absent-mindedly spinning my wedding ring around my finger. "You don't have to be strong tonight," he said. I looked up at him and managed a weak smile. "I've had 34 years of practice." He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a chair beside mine and simply stayed there. That was always his way. No speeches, no impossible promises, just quiet loyalty. Around 11 that night, our wedding coordinator approached with an apologetic expression. "There are still several gift boxes left. Would you like us to move them to your suite?" I nodded. While the staff carried everything upstairs, Ethan and I helped fold decorations into cardboard boxes. Ironically, the people cleaning up our wedding were strangers getting paid by the hour. The people who shared my last name couldn't spare a single evening. As we loaded flowers into the elevator, my phone finally rang. "Mom." For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "Hello?" Her voice came through breathless. "Honey, thank goodness you picked up. Not congratulations. Not I'm sorry. Just relief that I answered." "Did your ceremony finish already?" I actually laughed. "It's been over for hours." "Oh." An awkward pause followed. "We've had such a hectic night." I leaned against the elevator wall. I noticed. Mom sighed dramatically. Kyle's event turned into something much bigger than expected. "Really?" "Yes. Investors showed up. Important people. Your father thought we should stay longer." I closed my eyes. So my wedding wasn't important? Don't twist my words. There it was. The familiar script. Whenever I pointed out something painful, somehow I became unreasonable. Before I could answer, Dad took the phone. "Listen," he said firmly. "Families make sacrifices for each other." I almost asked why those sacrifices only ever flowed in one direction. Instead, I stayed quiet. Dad continued. "You understand that your brother needed us tonight." I whispered the only question left. "Did you ever think I needed you too?" Silence. Then he changed the subject. "We'll come visit next week." Not because they wanted to celebrate, because the obligation had finally become inconvenient to ignore. I ended the call after less than 3 minutes. Ethan didn't ask what happened. He already knew. We spent our first married night eating cold wedding cake from plastic forks while sitting on the floor of the hotel suite. Oddly enough, it became my favorite memory from the entire day. Because for those 20 quiet minutes, nobody expected anything from me. No fixing, no forgiving, no sacrificing, just existing. The next morning, we packed our luggage and prepared for the short drive to the lakeside cabin we rented for our honeymoon. Halfway there, my phone exploded with notifications, messages, missed calls, emails. Even relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly wanted my attention. My cousin Melissa texted first, "Call me immediately." Then Aunt Denise, "You need to know what's happening." Then my uncle, "It's about Kyle." I frowned. Ethan glanced over. "What now?" "I have no idea." He pulled into a gas station so I could answer safely. Melissa picked up before the first ring finished. "Have you seen the news?" "What news?" "Oh my God, you really don't know." "Know what?" "Kyle's company is being investigated." I blinked. My brother doesn't own a company. He does now. Apparently, 6 months earlier, Kyle had partnered with several investors in a luxury real estate startup. My parents had been bragging about it nonstop behind my back. Social media was full of expensive dinners, charity galas, golf tournaments, and photos beside people in tailored suits. I hadn't seen any of it. Mostly because nobody bothered inviting me. Melissa lowered her voice. Federal agents showed up at last night's event. I felt my stomach tighten. They questioned multiple executives. For what? Financial fraud. The words hung in the air, she continued. Some investors claim millions disappeared. I slowly looked at Ethan. His expression didn't change. He simply asked one question. Were your parents involved financially? I suddenly remembered something Dad had mentioned months earlier. He'd joked about moving retirement money into Kyle's can't-miss opportunity. At the time, I'd barely listened. Now my chest went cold. I thanked Melissa and hung up. Before I could process anything else, another call came through. Dad. This time, his voice sounded completely different. No confidence, no authority, only panic. It startled me. He almost never used my first name gently. I need your help. I stared through the windshield. Traffic rolled peacefully past. Families filled their cars with luggage for weekend vacations. The world looked completely normal. Mine suddenly wasn't. What happened? He hesitated, then finally admitted it. We invested almost everything. How much? All of it. All of what? Our retirement. My breath caught. And your mother's savings. I couldn't speak. We trusted Kyle. Another silence. Then he whispered the sentence that would replay in my mind for weeks. The lawyers say we might lose the house. I closed my eyes. Every birthday gift I'd skipped so they could pay bills. Every overtime shift I'd worked. Every family emergency I'd quietly solved. And somehow they had still believed Kyle's promises over decades of my consistency. Dad continued. We need somewhere to stay if things get bad. Ethan slowly reached over and squeezed my hand. Not to influence me, just to remind me I wasn't alone anymore. I asked the question that had lived inside me since childhood. If my wedding hadn't happened yesterday, would you even be calling me? He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. The truth was too obvious. Before hanging up, he whispered. You're still our daughter. I looked at the dark screen after the call ended. For years, I had waited desperately to hear those words. Yet somehow, hearing them now made me feel emptier than ever. Ethan started the car again. Neither of us spoke for several miles. Finally, he broke the silence. What are you going to do? I stared out at the road stretching ahead. I honestly don't know. But deep inside, another realization had already begun forming. This wasn't just about money, or fraud, or another disaster Kyle had created. For the first time in my life, the people who always expected me to rescue them had run out of places to hide, and they were driving straight toward the one daughter they had spent years pretending they could afford to lose. For the rest of the drive, I barely said a word. The honeymoon cabin Ethan had rented sat on the edge of a quiet lake surrounded by towering pine trees. It was supposed to be the place where we started our new life together. Instead, I spent the first afternoon staring at my silent phone, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't take long. By sunset, Mom called. Then Dad. Then Kyle. Then 3 aunts who hadn't spoken to me in nearly a year. It was almost funny. For decades, I had chased their attention. Now that they needed something, they couldn't stop calling. Ethan walked onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You don't have to answer. I know. So why do you keep looking at the screen? I thought about it for a moment. Because some small part of me still hopes they'll call to apologize. He sat beside me. And if they don't, I watched the sunlight disappear across the lake. Then I guess I finally stopped waiting. The next morning I answered Dad's call. His voice sounded exhausted. We're coming to see you. I frowned. We? Your mother and I. No, Dad. There was a pause. What do you mean no? I mean we're on our honeymoon. This is a family emergency. I almost laughed. When wasn't it? He ignored the question. We need to discuss this. What about it? The bank may freeze several accounts while the investigation continues. And we'll need financial help until everything gets sorted out. There it was. Not once had he asked whether I was happy, whether the wedding had gone well, whether Ethan and I were enjoying our first week as husband and wife. Straight to money. Straight to rescue the dependable daughter. Always. I spoke carefully. I can't help. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. You're serious? Yes, but you have savings. So did you. His breathing became heavier. You'd really abandon your own parents? The irony hit me so hard I almost smiled. Didn't you abandon your own daughter 3 days ago? He hung up. I expected to feel guilty. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Later that afternoon, Ethan and I rented kayaks and paddled across the lake. For 2 peaceful hours, nobody called. Nobody demanded. Nobody blamed. When we returned to shore, however, 37 unread messages waited for me. One stood out. From Kyle. Please, just hear me out. Against my better judgment, I called. He answered immediately. Avery, thank God. You have 5 minutes. You don't understand what's happening. Then explain. He sighed deeply. The media is exaggerating everything. What did you do? Nothing. What did your company do? Another pause. Some paperwork wasn't filed correctly. I had heard enough excuses in my lifetime to recognize one. Did you take investors' money? No. Did someone? I don't know. Did you sign documents? I trusted my partners. Every answer created 2 more questions. Finally, I asked the one thing that mattered. Did mom and dad invest because you asked them to? His voice dropped. Yes. How much did they give you? I don't know exactly. You don't know? I never looked. I nearly ended the call right there. Then he added quietly. I thought everything would work out. That sentence summarized my brother perfectly. He had spent his entire life assuming someone else would fix whatever went wrong. Usually our parents. Sometimes me. Now nobody could. When the call ended, Ethan was already setting the dinner table. You okay? I nodded. No, he waited. Kyle doesn't even know how much money they trusted him with. Ethan looked genuinely saddened. That's because he never had to carry consequences before. His words lingered with me. Consequences. Maybe that was the real difference between us. Every mistake I made growing up became my responsibility. Every mistake Kyle made became someone else's problem. Until now. 2 days later, we cut the honeymoon short. Not because my family demanded it, because I wanted closure. When we pulled into town, I noticed television vans parked outside Kyle's office building. Reporters clustered near the entrance. Camera crews interviewed angry investors carrying folders and legal documents. One woman cried openly while speaking into a microphone. My husband trusted them with our retirement. The sentence struck like lightning. So it wasn't only my parents. Dozens of families had believed the promises. Dozens now faced losing everything. That evening, Mom insisted on meeting. We chose a quiet diner. When Ethan and I arrived, my parents already looked 10 years older. Dad's shoulders slumped. Mom's eyes were swollen from crying. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, she reached across the table. Honey, we made mistakes. I gently moved my hand away. Yes. We should have come to your wedding. Yes. We're sorry. I searched her face. Part of me wanted desperately to believe it. But another part noticed what she hadn't said. She hadn't apologized for choosing Kyle. She hadn't apologized for years of treating me as second place. Only for what happened after everything collapsed. Dad cleared his throat. The lawyers think if we sell the vacation property, we might survive. You own a vacation property? Mom looked embarrassed. We bought it 2 years ago. With what money? She hesitated, then whispered. The profits Kyle promised us. I stared at them in disbelief. For years they claimed they couldn't afford to visit me, couldn't afford birthday trips, couldn't afford helping with college loans. Yet somehow they had purchased a lake house based on Kyle's investment dreams. The waitress refilled our coffee. Nobody touched it. Finally, Mom looked directly at Ethan. You'll help us, won't you? Before he could answer, I spoke. No. Both parents turned toward me. No? I married Ethan. I reached across the table and held his hand. I didn't marry an emergency fund. Dad's jaw tightened. So that's it? No. This is it. I stood slowly. For 34 years, I believed earning your love meant solving your problems. I took a deep breath. But love that only appears when someone needs money isn't love at all. Mom started crying again. Avery, please don't walk away. I looked at her sadly. I already know what it feels like to be left behind. Ethan and I walked toward the exit. Just before reaching the door, I glanced back. For the first time in my entire life, my parents weren't looking at Kyle. They were watching me leave. And something told me they had finally realized the daughter they depended on most had quietly stopped waiting for them to choose her. What none of us knew was that 48 hours later, investigators would uncover one document with Kyle's signature on it. A document that would drag every hidden family secret into public view and force my parents to confront a betrayal even greater than missing my wedding. 2 days after the meeting at the diner, my phone rang at 6:14 in the morning. I knew something had happened before I even looked at the screen. It was my father. He never called before sunrise. The moment I answered, I heard him breathing hard. His voice cracked. They arrested Kyle. I sat upright in bed. Ethan immediately woke beside me. What happened? I pressed the phone to speaker. Dad sounded completely defeated. The investigators found signed financial records. They say he approved transfers that never should have happened. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mom's sobbing echoed somewhere in the background. I don't understand, she cried. He promised he was protecting our future. After the call ended, Ethan quietly made coffee while I stared out the kitchen window. The strange thing was, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even surprised. I was grieving, not for Kyle, for the family I had spent my entire life believing I could fix. By lunchtime, every local news station was covering the scandal. Several executives had resigned. Multiple lawsuits were filed. Dozens of retirees claimed they had trusted the company with life savings. And buried halfway through one article was a sentence that made my stomach tighten. Investigators were reviewing whether family members knowingly encouraged additional investments. My parents called again. This time they didn't ask for money. They asked for a lawyer. Avery, Dad whispered. People think we convinced relatives to invest. Did you? He didn't answer. Mom finally admitted the truth. We told everyone Kyle's business was the safest opportunity we'd ever seen. How many people listened? Your Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, your cousin Emily. The list kept growing. Nearly 20 relatives. Some had invested thousands. Others nearly everything. I closed my eyes. For years they ignored my advice. Ignored my warnings. Ignored my existence. But when Kyle smiled and promised easy success, they followed him without question. That afternoon, Ethan drove me to my parents' house. The same house where I had celebrated birthdays that somehow always turned into celebrations for someone else. The same porch where my high school trophies collected dust, while Kyle's participation ribbons hung proudly in the hallway. Everything looked smaller now. Dad opened the door before we knocked. He had aged dramatically. His hands trembled. Inside, unopened mail covered the dining room table. Bills, legals notices, letters from banks. Mom hugged me the second I stepped inside. I let her. Not because everything was forgiven. Because she looked like someone who had finally run out of excuses. We sat together for almost an hour. Nobody argued. Nobody blamed. Eventually, Dad stood and walked into the hallway. When he returned, he carried a faded cardboard box. I think these belong to you. I opened it carefully. Inside were childhood drawings, academic awards, letters I'd mailed home during college, photographs, every achievement I'd ever thought they had thrown away. I looked up in confusion. You kept these? Mom nodded through tears. Every single one. Then why did it always feel like none of it mattered? She covered her face. Because we thought you didn't need us. I almost laughed. Didn't need them? The little girl who waited after every school concert, hoping her parents would stay long enough to congratulate her? The teenager who drove herself to medical appointments because Kyle needed the family car? The woman whose entire family skipped her wedding? How could they believe she never needed anyone? Dad answered the question before I asked it. You were always so capable. That wasn't permission to forget me. I know, and we kept telling ourselves you'd understand. I leaned back in my chair. I understood everything. You chose the child who needed rescuing, and assumed the child who stayed quiet would survive without love. Silence filled the room. Not defensive silence, the painful kind, the honest kind. Mom finally whispered, we failed you. For the first time in my life, they said it without adding an excuse afterward. No mention of Kyle, no mention of circumstances, no justification, just truth. When Ethan and I prepared to leave, Dad stopped me at the front door. There may not be much left after all this. I know. But if there is, he swallowed hard. It should be yours. I shook my head gently. I don't want your money. What do you want? I looked at both of them standing together on the porch. Older. Smaller. Human. I wanted parents who came to my wedding. Neither of them could answer. Some losses cannot be repaired, only acknowledged. 6 months later, Kyle accepted a plea agreement. The prison sentence was shorter than many expected because he cooperated with investigators. Several investors recovered part of their money. My parents sold their vacation property and eventually downsized to a modest house. They never asked me for another dollar. Every Sunday, Mom called just to ask how Ethan and I were doing. At first, the conversations lasted 3 minutes, then 5, eventually 20. Slowly, awkwardly, we began building something new. Not the family we should have been. The family we still had time to become. On our first wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised me with a framed photograph. Not one from the professional photographer, not the elegant portraits. Instead, it showed the exact moment we had cut the cake while dozens of empty chairs surrounded us. A year earlier, I saw abandonment in that picture. Now I saw something entirely different. Every empty seat represented someone who chose not to come. Every person standing in the photo represented someone who chose to stay. And that's when I finally understood the lesson my wedding had been trying to teach me all along. Your worth is never measured by the people who walk away. It's measured by the ones who remain when everyone else leaves. I placed the frame on our mantel and smiled. Because losing the family I kept trying to earn had made room for the life I no longer had to beg for. And for the first time since I was a little girl, being chosen wasn't something I hoped for. It was something I had already found.